Imagine the smell first. Burning flesh, human shit from loosened bowels, the copper-sweet stench of blood pooling on cobblestone. That'll never wash clean, no matter how many rains pass over it. You're standing in Paris. 13. 4. April, cold enough to see your breath, and you're watching two men have their cocks cut off in front of their lovers. The princesses are forced to watch, shaved bald, sackcloth scratching their royal skin. And here's what the history books don't tell you. The crowd liked it, not tolerated it, not endured it, liked it. Mothers lifted their children onto shoulders so they could see better. Men hawked meat pies as the screaming started. Because this wasn't just punishment. This was medieval Europe's favourite entertainment. And you just clicked on the polite version. What's coming next is what they buried. Philip IV. They called him Philip the Fair, which tells you something about how medieval nicknames work. He didn't just want the Downey brothers dead. Dead was too clean. Dead was for common criminals who stole bread or fucked the wrong merchant's daughter. No, these two Norman knights had touched royal flesh. They'd slipped inside princesses. Margaret and Blanche of Burgundy, daughters-in-law to the King of France, had spread their legs for men who weren't their husbands. And Philip needed everyone who saw what happened next to feel it in their spine. So the executioners took their time, iron bars, methodical. The tibia first, snap. Each fibula, snap. Ribs crack like wet branches breaking. And the crowd? The crowd counted. 1, 2, 3. Like they were keeping score at a tournament. The wheel was raised. Bodies spread-eagled and shattered, tied to wooden spokes. Birds took the eyes first, always the eyes. Then the soft tissue of the lips and tongue while the men were still breathing. But the princesses got something worse than death. Margaret of Burgundy, 25 years old. Silk gowns traded for brown sackcloth that scraped her nipples raw every time she breathed. She watched her lover castrated, watched molten lead poured onto skinless flesh. And the sound, this is the detail that sticks in my throat. The lead was heated in an iron ladle over an open fire until it glowed orange-white. When it hit exposed muscle, exposed nerve endings, it made a pop sound, like water hitting a hot pan but thicker, and the princesses were close enough to smell it, close enough that drops of molten metal hit the cobblestone near their bare feet. Then they dragged Margaret to Chateau Gaillard, a fortress on a cliff. Cold stone tower open to the French winter wind. No fire, no bedding, no human touch. Just sackcloth and stone, and the memory of her lover's screams playing on loop in her head, until she stopped being a person and became something that just waited. She died within a year. Officially, a chill, unofficially. Her husband Louis, who became King Louis X 5 days after her funeral, married 5 days after burying her. He knew exactly what that tower did to a woman's body. The damp, the frostbite, the slow shutting down of organs one by one. She was buried before she stopped breathing. But here's what makes your stomach turn if you really sit with it. The double standard wasn't a bug in the system. It was the system. King Cnut of England, ruler from 1016 to 1035, he wrote the law himself. An adulterous wife shall forfeit both her nose and her ears, his archbishop. Wolfston of York, an Old Testament absolutist, whispered biblical precedent into his ear, and the law was carved into English stone. What did a man lose for the same crime? A fine, some silver, a slap on the wrist, while the woman beside him held her face together with bloody rags for the rest of her shortened life. But here's the part that should make you laugh. That dark, bitter laugh you make when the hypocrisy is too perfect to ignore. Cnut kept a mistress named Elfgifu, while married to Queen Emma of Normandy, fathered bastards across his reign, multiple women, multiple children, and he never, once, applied his own law, not to himself, not to any man at his court. The blade never touched a single noble face in 11th century England. But if you were a peasant woman, if you kissed the wrong man at the wrong harvest festival, the village blacksmith was already heating the knife by the time the accusation reached the local priest. No trial, no appeal, just your face, the blade, and every neighbor you'd ever known watching you become a monster. And the logic, God, the logic of it, was that a woman's beauty was her weapon. Her face was her value on the marriage market. Remove the nose, remove the ears, and you've erased her. You've made her something no man will look at except in disgust. You've buried her while she's still walking. Wait, think about what I just said. Really think about it. These men, kings, archbishops, husbands, they weren't punishing infidelity. They were punishing female desire. The crime wasn't sex. The crime was wanting it. And that brings us to the punishments that never made the illuminated manuscripts. The Run, southern France. Towns like Toulouse and Millau had a custom called la course, which sounds almost athletic, almost clean. It wasn't. The town crier announced the date days in advance. This was crucial. The spectacle only worked if the crowd was massive, if every man, woman, and child in the region packed the main street to watch. The adulterers, man and woman, were stripped, sometimes allowed a thin undergarment, sometimes not. Modesty was not the point, visibility was. Then they were forced to sprint through the streets while the crowd threw rotten food, animal guts, human shit, and screamed every filthy thing they'd ever wanted to scream at someone who couldn't fight back. But Milau's custom added a detail that tells you everything about who these punishments were really for. The woman ran first, naked, holding one end of a rope, the other end of that rope, tied around her lover's testicles. If she stumbled on the cobblestones, if she fell behind in exhaustion, the rope yanked tight. And every single person in that crowd knew exactly why the man behind her suddenly screamed. The rope tied her body to his pain. The humiliation was engineered, designed, every second of it calculated to burn into the memory of anyone who watched. And the worst part? The poor were the ones who ran. For control, the rich paid fines and kept their dignity and their genitals intact, while some peasant woman's feet bled on the cobblestone and her lover's scrotum tore slowly from the weight of her stumbling. But the Skimmington ride made the run look almost merciful. Rural England, Scotland. When a village caught an adulterous couple, there was no court, no magistrate, no law except whatever the mob decided. They dragged them from their homes, sometimes from their beds, still naked, still warm from each other's bodies, and paraded them through the streets on a donkey, back to back, stripped, or dressed in rags so thin you could see everything. Pots banged, pans hand clanged, whistles, children throwing mud and rocks. The procession could last hours. The entire village became the executioner. Every neighbour, every friend, every person you'd broken bread with. And that was the point. There was no one to appeal to. No mercy to beg for, because the community was the punishment. And here's what they called the secondary effect: row music. Rough music wasn't just for the guilty. It was a warning to every other couple in the village. Watch, enjoy, participate, because the same thing could happen to you. Tonight, tomorrow, next week. A single case of infidelity could terrorize an entire region for years because everyone knew, everyone had seen. What waited for the next person who fucked the wrong spouse? But if the woman refused to break under a parade, if she held her head high and refused to cry, the village had a second option. The ducking stool looks almost gentle in woodcut illustrations. A chair on a long beam, the woman tied to it, plunged into cold river water while the crowd watches from the bank. Gentle, except English rivers are freezing. The shock of cold water, especially for older women, frail women, women with weak hearts, triggered cardiac arrest mid-dunk. The length of submersion, entirely up to whoever was working the lever. Maybe the village drunk, Maybe a jilted ex-lover. Maybe someone who just wanted to see how long she could hold her breath before the bubbles stopped. They pulled bodies up, still tied to the chair. Blue lips, open eyes, and the parish register recorded it as an accident. Accident, not execution, because the ducking stool was legally considered a light punishment. But the stocks and the pillory, these killed in slow motion. The stocks locked your ankles. The pillory locked your head and hands. You were bent forward, helpless, in the center of a town square. The sentence was usually 2 hours to a full day. What made it deadly wasn't the wood. It was the crowd. Onlookers were encouraged to throw things, rotten fruit, dead animals, human excrement. Animal offal still warm from the butcher's block. But when the crowd got bored, or when they got mean, they switched from food to rocks, fist-sized stones, cobblestones pried from the street itself. And there are records, actual court records, of people stoned to death while pinned inside a pillory, crushed skulls, broken eye sockets, teeth knocked down throats. King Edward had to pass a law ordering pillories to be built sturdy enough to hold a human body, because so many wooden frames had collapsed under the weight of thrown stones, leaving the victim crushed underneath the broken beams while the crowd kept throwing. And then there was the ear. I told you it gets worse, for serious sexual offenders. And serious could mean anything from adultery to sleeping with someone above your station. The magistrate sometimes ordered the accused's ear, then he be kneed directly into the wooden frame of the pillory, an iron spike, driven through the cartilage into the beam. Now you had two options. Neither of them survivable. Not really. Option 1. Stand perfectly still for the sentence. 6 hours. 12 hours. Sometimes a full day, in the heat or the cold, while your body weight slowly pulled against the spike until the ear began to tear. 1 millimeter at a time, the skin stretching, the cartilage separating, the blood trickling down your neck while you tried not to move and made it worse anyway. Option 2. Walk away, just walk. Rip your ear off the spike yourself. Leave most of the flesh behind on the wood. Stagger out of the square with blood pouring down the side of your face and a raw hole where your ear used to be. Either way, you left that square marked for life. And that was the whole purpose of the ritual. Some pillories became famous for the pieces of ear still lodged in their beams. Travelling executioners would point them out. See that? That's what's left of Thomas the Carpenter. Fucked the wrong woman in 1347. Remember him. Remember this. The wood remembered what the victims tried to forget. But the branding iron? The branding iron wrote your crime onto your face, so no one could ever forget. Repeat offenders across Europe were branded with a hot iron pressed into the cheek or the forehead. In some regions, a letter was burned into the skin. This is the ancestor of the Scarlet Letter, but Hawthorne's novel was a gentle version of the reality. The branding was public. Always public. The iron was heated in a brazier, right there, in the square, so the accused could see it glowing red, could feel the heat from 10 feet away, could smell the metal heating. And then the executioner pressed it into flesh and held it there, while the skin bubbled and blackened and the crowd leaned in to watch. The brand wasn't just meant to hurt. It was designed to prevent the person from ever escaping their conviction. Any town, any village, any stranger who saw that mark on your face knew instantly what you'd done and barred the door. No work, no shelter, no mercy. You wore your crime until the day you died, and if you were a woman with no husband to forgive her. The church had something quieter than the brand, something worse, forced enclosure in a nunnery. Emperor Justinian wrote this template into law in the 6th century. The medieval church kept it alive for the next 1,000 years. A convicted adulteress could be legally dragged to the nearest convent, her head shaved in front of the nuns, her clothes replaced with a rough habit she never asked for, and then she was locked inside. for life, whether she'd ever said a prayer or not, whether she believed or not, whether she screamed and clawed at the walls or not. And here's the twist that makes this punishment so perfectly medieval. After 2 years of enclosure, her husband had a choice. He could take her back, bring her home, pretend it never happened, or he could leave her walled up in the convent forever with no right of appeal. Most of them chose to leave her there. The convents of northern France and northern Italy became, across the 14th and 15th centuries, quiet holding cells for unwanted wives. Dozens of women in some locations, their only crime, being caught with the wrong man, being seen smiling at the wrong man, being accused of smiling at the wrong man, and at night, if you stood outside those stone walls, you could sometimes hear them crying through the windows. But for the worst cases, for the women whose husbands wanted them not just punished but erased, the Italians and Germans had invented something that still makes historians argue today. Live burial inside a stone wall disappears in multiple medieval legal codes, but was rarely carried out in its full form. Though rarely is not never, a convicted woman, sometimes an adulteress, sometimes accused of both adultery and witchcraft, would be walled up alive inside a small stone chamber, a cell barely larger than her body. The bricks were laid one at a time in front of her face. She could hear each stone being placed, the scrape of mortar, the magistrate reading the sentence in Latin, while the light got smaller and smaller and smaller until the last shaft of light disappeared and she was alone in the dark. A tiny opening was left for air. Occasionally a piece of stale bread was pushed through, and she just waited. Most victims died within a week. Dehydration, suffocation, madness, probably, before either of those. But a few, according to preserved court records from northern Italy, lasted closer to a month. Villagers passing by could hear sounds from inside the wall, scratching, moaning, something that might have been words. And then, one day, nothing. The stone tower at Chateau Gaillard that killed Margaret of Burgundy was a softer version of this. A tower instead of a wall, but the architectural intent was identical. The woman was meant to disappear slowly from the world without being executed outright. No blood on anyone's hands, no executioner's axe to clean, just silence and stone and the slow forgetting. The silence of the stone spoke louder than any execution. The shaved head was the version most women actually endured. Across Germany, France, England, the most common punishment for a convicted adulteress was to have her head shaved completely bald in public, often followed by a parade through the village. Sometimes the husband was legally permitted to do it himself. Strip his wife naked in front of her own family. Shave her head, flog her through the streets. Throw her out of the house forever. In medieval Europe, a woman's hair was one of her few socially approved forms of beauty. To remove it was to make her a visual confession. You couldn't hide a shaved head under any scarf or hood without everyone knowing exactly why you were wearing it. The shaved woman in the market square needed no trial record, no written accusation. Her head told the story before she opened her mouth. And if she had money, if she'd brought property into the marriage, the forfeited dowry, quiet, legal, devastating, across most of medieval Europe. The standard civil penalty for a convicted adulteress was total confiscation of her dowry. Her husband pocketed everything in one lump sum: land, money, livestock, everything she'd brought into the marriage. Gone. Then he cast her out with nothing but the clothes on her back. In the medieval economy, a woman's dowry was her only real property under the law, her only financial leverage, her only bargaining chip for any future remarriage. Strip it from her in open court, and you'd condemned her, quietly, legally, bloodlessly, to the nearest convent, the streets of the nearest city, or outright prostitution as the only path left to food and a roof at night. The horror of the dowry confiscation was that it looked almost merciful on paper. No mutilation, no execution, no obvious blood splashed across the parish register. But historians who've traced the lives of women, stripped of their dowries, across 13th and 14th century France and England, find the same grim pattern repeating in every town: early death, starvation, disease, and unmarked graves with no names carved into the stone. So here's the pattern, the ugly, grinding pattern that ties all of this together. Medieval adultery was almost never about sex, not the way we think of it now. It was about property, inheritance. The paranoid terror that a noble lord might spend his whole life raising another man's child as his legal heir. An unfaithful wife threatened the bloodline. And a bloodline, a noble bloodline, was worth more than any human life inside that house. Worth more than a peasant woman's face. Worth more than a knight's genitals. Worth more than a princess freezing to death alone in a stone tower at age 25. The punishments had to be public, theatrical, impossible to forget for anyone who saw them, because the real target standing in the square was never just the guilty woman. It was every other woman watching from her window, already quietly calculating the cost of a single wrong glance across a crowded hall, already knowing, in her bones, that her body was not her own. The Downey brothers died on a wheel in 1314, with their bones shattered and the crowd still cheering, their skinless bodies left for birds while children pointed and laughed. Margaret of Burgundy froze to death alone at Chateau Gaillard the following spring. 25 years old, her husband remarried 5 days after her body was pulled from the tower. 5 days. King Cnut kept his mistress Elfgifu until the day he died, completely untouched by the law he'd carved into the stone of England. Every peasant woman who'd lost her nose and ears to his law rotted in unmarked graves, while he fathered more bastards and died fat and warm in his bed. And somewhere, in a forgotten French village, a village whose name no one bothered to write down, a woman ran naked through the streets. Feet bleeding, breasts bare, holding a rope tied to the man she loved, while the entire town stood and watched. The rope went tight. The man screamed. The crowd laughed, and everyone who saw it remembered her face forever. Now, you're still here. You watched all of it. You read every word, and that means something. Not about history. About you. About what you can't look away from. About the same part of your brain that made those medieval villagers lift their children onto their shoulders for a better view. The wheel turns. The crowd watches. We just changed venues. If this got under your skin, and I know it did, hit that like button. Subscribe. Because there's more where this came from. And you're going to want to see what's next, even if you don't want to. I'll see you in the next one.